I'd say the first is if it's just boring. You want to do something that's novel, and if it's novel and it's interesting, I'm gonna be willing to tolerate a whole bunch of really poor writing and slightly I don't know, unorthodox methods and things like that, and give a review that tries to point the author in the right direction. I'll be willing to put that time in if I think it's really worthwhile. But if I read it and it seems like it's the 140th paper looking at organic tomatoes, then I probably just won't be willing to do that. I guess instead of thinking about the big no's, I think I'd point you towards thinking about the things that really get a reviewer excited. You want an abstract, an intro, a conclusion, and all of your tables and figures to tell a story by itself. And if you do that and you can excite people with those pieces, the rest of it just needs to be relatively coherent.
Yeah, so I agree with David. The novel idea is obviously always something that reviewers and editors value. In addition to that, I also appreciate when I see that the authors really know the literature. I don't like when something is just random there, or the relevant literature is not reported, because this signals that you really don't know what has been done and how your work is advancing that space. I also appreciate good, very well written method sections, because I think that if you're able to link the methods with your tables, people will understand what you are doing. Most of the time when a reviewer has hard time linking the equations, for example, with whatever you have in the tables, starts kind of getting frustrating and thinking, okay, what is this? What is that? And that is when you are going to start realizing that maybe the paper is not well done, maybe the authors don't know what they're doing, and is when maybe the reviewers are going to reject the paper.
So a couple of things come to mind for me. It's accurately stating what you're doing. In other words, don't overstate it. So when I start reading a paper and it's like, we are measuring the world, then it's like you already set a tone where it's not true. And then I will view the rest through that lens, and it's just be accurate, right? Nobody expects you to do everything. Just be accurate in describing what you're doing. I totally agree with Vincenzina on the methods. Sometimes I really just go straight to the design, and you are learning so many methods here, right? So before you do your study, do your homework, make sure that everything is correct that you are doing, because as much as I may like the topic, if I find something that's incorrect and that cannot be corrected, then it's just really difficult, frustrating, and in proceeding, right? Like what can I say when I already know that this was wrong, right? So those are probably two big things for me.
I think, first of all, that sort of what's the bar is going to vary with the journal. So, so that's sort of one thing. And it's probably with that would be both a combination of innovativeness and sort of, importance of the question. And so, depending on which journal sends it to me, I'm going to apply a slightly different standard based on those things. I think the abstract is really critical in that first couple of paragraphs of the introduction. And the reason I say that twofold. One is sometimes in a submission system is like a thing where you like put your abstract in, and then some people won't put it in their document. I'm telling you, make the first page of your PDF the abstract. It's okay if the reviewer sees it twice. It's not okay if they don't see it at all. So in what happens is sometimes you've done all this great work, and then the abstract is the thing you do at the end. You're like, oh, I'm sick of this thing. I got to get it out the door. Really, actually, you should probably write the abstract first. It's like the thing, and it's the first thing the reviewer reads. It's the first thing I get sent as a reviewer as to whether I want to review the paper. Sometimes I won't review a paper if I'm like, this isn't even worth my time to put into it. And I'm making that judgment on about 5 or 6 sentences in that abstract. So really take time with that abstract. Think about doing it first. Think about going back to it at the end, and then really got to sell the pitch in that first like 2 paragraphs. Like just take time to do that. You probably all seen like the introduction formula. It's not a bad formula. You can do a lot worse. And so but think really, it's, it's maybe a behavioral bias, but I'm very influenced by first impressions. Like, you got to sell me early, and then I'll, as David said, I'll give some forgiveness later if I kind of like the idea. But it takes a lot for me to be like self-reflective and say, well, I didn't really like this introduction, but boy, it really kind of got to me in like the 4th section. That happens, but I'd say it's harder. Have to be in a good space, for that to happen. You didn't ask this question, but I'll turn the question up where I thought you were going to go with this question is, how do you review papers? Which is a different question. And so again, you didn't ask this, but we'll give some advice there, which is, and I'm saying this because I think, and I can look over the course of my career early on, I think early in your career, you probably give too much in terms of review, and you're probably a little too critical. That's sort of the nature of the game, I think. My colleague Wade Morrison, who was one of the former colleague at Oklahoma State, he was one of the AJ editors. He always said, I always like sending reviews to associate professors because assistant professors are too critical and write too much, and full professors are too busy and don't spend enough time. So I would say if you're like early in your career, your tendency is going to be to give too much feedback and to be overly critical. So I would say, like, if you're writing reviews at your stage of the career, you probably want to think like, what are the 2 or 3 most important things I need to get across? And let's focus on those rather than writing like a 10-page report. Let's focus on the big things, particularly if you're going to reject the paper. The reviewer doesn't really care after a while. You need to like really say, here are the couple of things. Who cares about whether you misspelled a word on the 5th page? That's not the thing if you're rejecting the paper.
Another thing, I mentioned the connection between the theory and the method you use. So what also frustrates me extremely is when I read a paper and it says it's on perception, and then it's all they do is attitudes, then I feel like you didn't do a good job from the beginning on, because there are definitions in the literature, which is what, and then it taints the whole paper for me. So just be very clear what you want to measure. Like, think that we talked about the research process. Think about, do I want to measure perception or attitudes or personality, general trust, institutionalized trust? Go to the literature, find the definitions so that you understand what is it that I'm measuring. And then you go from there. And it, of course, makes it so much easier to write a compelling text when you go in that order.
Yeah, maybe something to add as a reviewer. That sometimes it's also nice, if you're critical, yes, but then it's also nice when you see that when you can really shape that paper as a reviewer, and you receive a paper in one way, and then the paper is published in another way, and most of those changes are driven by your comments. That is also something that can be a source of joy for crazy researchers. But this is also something to think of, right? You are serving the profession, and is not only to criticizing the profession, but also to provide constructive comments that can improve the way a good paper can be published and can benefit like other scholars.
Yeah, so I think I agree with that. You got to be careful as a reviewer that you're improving their work rather than making it your own. Right. Exactly. Although I will say there have been several times where reviewers have really pushed a paper very far from what our original vision was, and I think it's usually been an improvement. So I think it's been a good thing. I'm still sort of dwelling on this original question over what are the things that just stop me dead in my tracks. I had a review that I was doing a little bit ago, and they were claiming to do something entirely new. And it was something very interesting, but they were like leaving out this literature that was doing something almost exactly the same tools, but not applied to the same problem. And I tried to point this out in my review, that they really needed to connect to this literature that was long literature, and one that was really very closely tied to this journal I was reviewing for, and almost decided to just reject it at that point, because it looked like they hadn't read the main literature they needed to know, right? And they responded, instead of citing that literature, I guess they somehow figured out who I was, and they just like inserted a page of citing my work. And I had a hard time. So I basically submitted the same review again and said, no, really, you do need to cite this other work that wasn't mine. So listen to your reviewers. Okay.
So just one thing, if you get a paper rejected and you submit it elsewhere, listen to the reviewers. I think I got a paper 4 times from 4 different journals, and they never addressed my main concern. And it was rejected every single time. And that is very frustrating for the reviewer, and I guess for the editors too. So you don't have to do everything, but if there is critical concern, you have to address it. That would also be a no.